Firehouse Tales number 2. My name is Joe B. I am a retired firefighter of 22 years. I was a driver. Engineer was our title for that position for 4 years that I enjoyed a great deal. I felt was the best job in the whole profession. I was a lieutenant for 14 years and a captain, and at times when my boss was on vacation I served as deputy chief of our department. I wanted to share some stories about firehouse life for people who are curious about what life was like for firefighters before 9/11, and how the professional environment changed after 9/11. Changed a great deal, I believe. One interesting aspect of firefighting that a lot of people don't know is the collective personality. Now, any teacher, I was a school teacher for 4 years before I became a firefighter. Any teacher knows that classes begin to form a kind of collective personality. Some classes are fun, some classes are a lot of work because the students are just distracted. Now, of course, you'll have individuals in the difficult class that are very devoted and attentive, and you'll have individuals in the fun class that are serious and can be a problem. So it doesn't change the individual, but the collective seems to form a kind of personality. Well, this was really visible in a very strange way when I joined the fire service. In our department, we had 24-hour shifts. So you had A shift would be on duty from 8 a.m. until 8 a.m. the next day. B shift would come in at 8 a.m. and A shift would go home. 24 hours later, C shift would come in and relieve B shift, and then 24 hours later, A shift would come back. So you would be on duty for 24 hours and you'd be off duty for 48 hours. Now, A shift, in the early 90s when I joined in our department, A shift was a collection of guys that seemed to be very comfortable around, let's say, motorcycle biker gangs. They had a very rough sense of humor. There was a very macho style about them. A lot of them were chain smokers. A lot of them had big mustaches, gravelly voices, history of truck driving. A lot of them did indeed drive motorcycles. Very rough crowd. B shift was a collection of former military, and the worst, the worst guys you didn't want to be with were the military wannabes who never served in the military, but really took the firehouse culture in a very strict military way. Kind of like some of the characters from the movie Animal House, Niedermeyer, people like that, that are not actually in the military, but envision themselves as exemplary military types. But also, a lot of former military guys were in B shift. These consisted mostly of Marines and Navy. Now, my understanding was that Navy people all get firefighter training. Everybody in the Navy gets firefighter training. At least that was what their telling was. So it's very easy for someone leaving the Navy to join the fire service. It's a comfortable shift for them. The Marines, I don't know what their attraction was to the fire service. A lot of them were also in the police. These guys were often our bridge between the firefighter and police, helping develop things like shooting contests, softball contests, things of that sort. A lot of these guys knew the Marines, former Marines in the police force also. B shift had a very, very strict disciplinary culture. C shift was bizarre. I was shocked when I first worked a C shift. The following conversations really took place. Okay, during lunch, an officer walks in and playfully says, "That's my seat, Johnson." And a guy actually gets up from the chair and laughs and says, "I'm sorry, Lieutenant, I'm sorry," and moves all of his stuff over so the lieutenant can sit in that chair. And I was shocked at that. There's no way that that would ever happen on A shift. And on B shift, I couldn't imagine it happening. Another fun thing that happened on C shift was an actual conversation. Somebody asked, "May I have the salt, please?" And then somebody got up from their chair and reached the salt and handed it to him. "Here you go." And he said, "Oh, thank you." And that just struck me as just hilarious. It's just so out of place for a B shift or an A shift environment. Another fun thing about C shift that I discovered was I got used, when I was an officer, I was working on C shift one time and at our central fire station. Right after the morning break, I went upstairs to the dorm that was up above the firehouse floor, the bays where the fire trucks were, and we still had the poles at our central fire station that you would slide down. So the dorms are right above the engine bay where the fire trucks are parked. So I went up and I opened up the doors to the pole, and I was shouting down for somebody to bring up this amount of paper towels, this amount of toilet paper. I needed this and this and this, and there was nobody there. And I thought that this was the protocol. Right after break, somebody goes upstairs and shouts down. Somebody else waits down there and gets it all out of the closet and brings it up, so we don't have to go up and down the stairs, 4 or 5 times. So I called down to the break room to tell the guys, "Hey, I'm up here. Make sure you bring up this and this and this and this." And one of the firefighters apologized. "Oh, I'm sorry, Lieutenant. I'm sorry. I'll be right up." And I was kind of puzzled, thinking, what in the world? What are these guys? How come they're not prepared to go upstairs to clean the dorm out? And then I walk around seeing which windows need to be cleaned, and I'm pulling out the beds away from the wall so we can mop and sweep behind the beds. And I get to the corner, and the lieutenant that was on, I forget if it was the rescue truck or the aerial truck or the pumper, I forget which one I was on. One of the lieutenants is asleep in his bed at 9:30, or maybe closer to 10 o'clock in the morning, when we were getting ready to clean the dorm. And I was just in shock about that. I just couldn't believe it, that this guy who's supposed to be guiding his men was asleep already. And it was very clear to me, that these guys are not in the habit of cleaning the firehouse, at least cleaning the dorm after on Saturdays. Saturdays was the routine. I'll share with you our routine that we had on Tuesdays. All the engines are checked. That includes the lawnmowers, the station generator. You drive the truck out, you connect it to a fire hydrant, you flow water out of it. You check all the fluids on the truck, the air pressure in the tires, anything that's motorized, you're going to work on and check. And that includes the boat motor also. Also on Saturday, that's let me see, that's Tuesday, we do the engine maintenance. On Friday, we used to have the ARF classes, the classes at the airport. And that was for the stations that are immediately around the airport. That's a separate district, District 2 from the district I was in. And then also medical classes we would have on Friday. And then on Saturday, we would do all the yard work at the station. And then in the afternoon, we would clean the inside of the station. Now, at Station 1, we had so many people because we had different engine companies there. We had the rescue, we had the tower, the big ladder truck, and we also had the fire truck, the fire engine. And we also had the captain's station there. So there were usually at least 7 people there, maybe more. So we would send 2 or 3 guys to start cleaning the inside of the station, and I enjoyed doing that. I'll just go ahead and do that just to make sure that it's done properly. and somebody else will clean the kitchen. I'll go upstairs and do the dorm, and then we'll have the firefighters, usually the young guys, pushing the lawnmowers and the weed eaters around outside. And then I'll make it outside at some point, help them sweep the grass clippings off the sidewalk, and in general make sure that they did a good job. Sundays was just relaxing. Uh, Anytime after 10 p.m., you can't have any visitors at all. 4 p.m., every shift was PT, physical training. And that's from 4 at least until 5. And that consisted of stretches that we would all do together. And then after that, you'd have your choice. A lot of the guys would do weight training. A lot of the guys would run laps or run stairs, station stairs. A lot of the stations didn't have stairs, so you'd run laps outside the station. Running was always the best exercise. The runners were always the guys you wanted to be with in a big fire, because the guys that just sat there and worked out on the weights, they would always pull some kind of hamstring or some kind of ligament problem. They'd have problems with their ankles or their knees working at the big fire. And they would also suck down the air tank in no time, and they'd constantly be changing their tanks. Whereas the runners had really good stamina. They'd be very slow and sipping the air in their air tanks, and they could go more than 20 minutes of vigorous work in a house fire without changing out their air pack, which is really nice. So it's always better to be with the runners than the weightlifters, in my opinion. But the whole job itself centered on the driver. And there was an expression in our department that Moe, Larry, and Curly, okay, the Three Stooges, if they had a good driver who could get them to a scene quickly, even Moe, Larry, and Curly could look like heroes. Even those guys could figure out what to do to help somebody. But if you have Steven Seagal and Clint Eastwood and Arnold Schwarzenegger as firefighters, they're going to look like idiots if they can't get to the fire. So everything depends on the driver. And also, you have to have a driver, not only who knows where he's going, but who knows how to pump the truck, okay, how to pump the water into the hoses, and how to get tools. If you're at a car wreck scene and you need specific chains, okay, to pull up the steering column out of the way of the driver's chest, and you've got to use some hydraulic equipment for that. You have to have a driver who knows where everything is on the truck. The way that was done in our department is you'd have lieutenants who would hide, let's say, one Phillips head screwdriver from the toolbox at the beginning of the shift. And while the driver's out there checking the checklist, he'll be in there making breakfast. And when the guys come in for breakfast, he'll ask the driver if anything was missing. And if the driver said nothing's missing, he'll show him the Phillips head screwdriver. Or it would be a small wrench or something, one little thing. I hated that. I considered that kind of a harassment. And I just told the guys it's sink or swim. If you screw up at the scene, we're going to have a lot of classes to make sure it doesn't happen again. But I'm going to start out the shift with you guys on a clean slate. And I'm just going to assume that you know where everything is. And I never had a problem with the guys. But the officers who always hid small things like that were often hated by the drivers, and it created an ugly work environment. And the ugly work environment was the worst thing you could have, okay? A shift was always fun to work with these guys. B shift was not as much fun. A lot of these guys tried to not be fun, but there was still somehow fun was had. And C shift was too polite to have fun. Very, very different personalities collectively. There was also one other story I wanted to tell, and that was when we had the air conditioning go out. Now, a lot of these trucks after 9/11 in the 21st century, in the 2000s, a lot of the fire trucks that were delivered to us were full of all these electronics. And of course, all these electronic components break. the old trucks that we had, like an American LaFrance truck, like pictured here, okay, it had vents on the floor that you could kick open with your foot. It had vents on the ceiling that you could open up. It had a window that you could easily open and close. And then there was a sliding glass window behind you. I'm talking about this, the driver and the officer's seat, okay? There was a sliding glass window you could open behind you. So you'd have air moving above you, air moving below you, air moving from the side window of the door, and then an open space behind you for air to move, okay? So those trucks, those old American LaFrances, did not have air conditioning. I never saw one with air conditioning. We started getting trucks with air conditioning, but the air conditioning would go out. And then the chief would complain and say, hey, we never had air conditioning, when I was a firefighter. And I had to point out to him that there's no floor vent, there's no ceiling vent, and the windows don't open except for the one on the door. You don't have any ventilation in the new trucks. They're not made for that. They're made for the air conditioning. So we took some temperature readings from the trucks, okay, just driving around with the windows open. And the windows were in excess. The temperature inside the truck was always in excess of 100 degrees. And if you had 40% humidity, 50% humidity, which wasn't uncommon in the part of Texas where we were, you'd have a heat index in the 130s. And it's just physically draining driving around in these trucks like that. So the old days, the trucks did not have air conditioning. That's true. But they were much more comfortable than the modern trucks, because the modern trucks lose their air conditioning. You just can't keep, at least the trucks that I was on, you can't keep the AC working all the time. Sometimes it just goes out. The shift personalities, the truck air conditioning, the shift in the electronics versus the old manual trucks. In those old American LaFrances that we had, we also had a Pierce Lance truck that was very simple. Everything was manual. You could fix everything yourself. There's nothing computerized. You didn't have to have some technician come in. You could see everything. You could see where the water went, where the valves were. Any problem, you could easily spot it. The only problem we had in those old trucks was transmission sometimes. We had an old truck that wouldn't go into reverse. Things like that. In the stick shift trucks, a lot of guys ask how you put it in the pump. It was in fourth gear. I remember that you would shift it into pump. We had one that was 3 on the tree, and it was third gear that you would shift. Put it into a shift into pump to activate the pump. Well, that's enough for now. I'll share one story with you about military guys in the fire service. How a lot of them were just given a lot more tolerance than you would normal guys because of their service and because of their years of experience. You had a different set of context with these guys. So we had a guy who was a former Marine who would like to cook onion soup mix in the kitchen. And we'd ask him, why do you make that? You never eat it. And finally he confessed that he turns on the vent over the stove when he's making the onion soup mix. And he does it deliberately because the smell goes into the dispatch center that's next door, and all the dispatchers hate that smell. It comes across after it travels through the vents and the ceiling tiles and everything. It comes across this really acrid smell. And so I went over to the dispatch center, and sure enough, they were all complaining about it. So we had one dispatcher come over, and she was making coffee in the kitchen. And this was my first shift over there at that fire station. The fire station is divided in half, okay? Half was administrative offices and the dispatch center for the dispatchers. That was their center. And the other half of the building was our fire station. The dispatch center also had classrooms that the police used, especially in their night shift. They would come and use that because the building was open. They could have classes back there. So we often had police in there. And we shared our fire station side with a separate dorm for ambulance personnel that was a contract company, that wasn't city employees. So we had paramedics there, we had the fire department there, we had the dispatchers there, and often at nighttime after 10 p.m. we would have police rummaging around making coffee. So it was a perfect environment. I loved it, except around the year 2003 we started to have these weird problems with what could be developing into sexual harassment problems. So my captain told me to go over there and be lieutenant on B shift, and he knew that we wouldn't have problems if I was on duty there. And so the first shift there, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't have any inkling. So one of the dispatchers comes in and is making coffee, and I had bought a cookbook, one of those magazine cookbooks by the checkout at the grocery store, and it was all muffins and cakes and cookies cookbook. And I was showing it to the dispatcher. I said, here, take this over, and any time you guys or the night shift or anybody wants any of these things, just go when you get a chance, go to the grocery store, buy all the ingredients, put a little post-it note on there, and bring it over with the bag of groceries and set it in the kitchen, and I'll make it for you, whatever it is. Any of these recipes, I'll do it for you. And that was my peacekeeping gesture there, to try to have goodwill with these dispatchers. And she's thanking me and pouring herself a cup of coffee. And this guy, the guy who made the onion soup mix just to rankle the dispatch center, comes in, former Marine, many, many years. And just looking at him, you could tell he's a former Marine, not only from his tattoos, but just his attitude, his posture. And he stood there and he looked at me and he looked at her and he totally interrupted her. He said in a real loud voice, he said, "You know how to tell when a woman's lying?" And I looked at him, my eyes got wide, and I was just like, oh my God, don't, what are you doing? And the dispatcher stopped pouring her cup of coffee and stared at him kind of with a puzzled look. And he looks at her, he looks at me, he says, "Her lips are moving." Ha 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 ha. And then he walks away, starts chain smoking out of the bay. And I was terrified, and the dispatcher just started laughing, cracking up. And it was just this running joke that he's tormenting them, and, they I don't know, they just had this weird vibe. And we never had any problems on our shift. And the problems ended up coming from another shift, and that's a story for another time. But I had to write letters and get out of that station because there was something going on, but it wasn't among our guys. We had a very safe, good vibe going, and it was something that came up that it was crazy. That ended up being a crazy work environment. That'll be another story for another time, but I had to write letters and get out of there. And so the captain sent me to the most busiest fire station, I think, in our whole county, that covered all of the west side of the city. And we had our own Jaws of Life on our truck. We had rams, hydraulic rams, and hydraulic cutters to rescue people out of crashed cars. We covered the interstate, we covered the county, we covered county fires. We did mutual aid to cities that would have these huge grass fires. And we were a busy, busy company. And a lot of people associated that station with kind of like a little mini department on its own, because it would be at least 10 minutes before anybody would arrive to help us with anything. So it was fun. And I stayed at that station, although at first I hated it. I stayed there for 5 years, 6 years, I think. 6 years, and then I went to the airport. And that's another story for another time also, being a firefighter at the airport. That was wonderful. Well, I hope you enjoyed my story. I hope I educated you a little bit on a wonderful little subculture in our world. I visited with firefighters in Quebec, in Missouri, in all over Texas, and also in Northern California, Chico and San Francisco. And that was back in '99. And I got to tell you that the firefighters will also come to visit us. We had a long talk with a firefighter on vacation from Philly. My goodness, it's a common culture. The guys are the same. It's the same people. We shared the training field at Dallas Fort Worth with the Shanghai Fire Department from China. The guys that were getting ARF certified in Shanghai. We shared the training facility with them. Those guys were exactly like our firefighters. I thought they were all going to be, these communist superhero hulks, but they were just regular guys. They were funny. Uh, it's fun. It's a fun world, and I'm going to try to share that with you. And thanks for coming along.